Okay.
Hi, I'm here today with a very special guest. I don't usually do these type of things, so I'm very excited to welcome my first guest on my BookTube channel. And I'm going to let her introduce herself and her book. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Monica Gomez Hira, and I am the author of Once Upon a Quinceañera, which is a YA contemporary romance. It's coming out on March 2nd, 2021. And it's about an 18-year-old girl named Carmen Aguilar, who, because she missed graduating by one credit, is forced over the summer to get an internship and work for a party company. Unfortunately, then she's paired with her most regrettable ex-boyfriend. She's beauty, he's the beast. And then on top of that, they're hired to work for her estranged cousin's quinceañera, and she is not happy about any of this.
A lot of things happening, a lot of moving parts.
Yes.
So because there's so much things going on in your book, where did the first thought of it come from, and how did you develop it along the way?
I didn't have a quinceañera personally, but I've always been sort of fascinated by them just because I went to a couple and they were incredibly elaborate parties where there were so many rituals and it felt so meaningful. And so I was interested in that sort of as a coming of age idea. And then I started sort of hearing, it sounds odd to say, but I started sort of hearing voices in my head of characters that I thought would fit that story. And then I read an article online about party princess companies. And I read that most party princesses are actually teenagers to early 20s. And it just sort of all came together. And I thought, oh, that would be a fun way to combine the two ideas. And the book was born. Well, that's a very abbreviated version because it went through about 1 million drafts and different ideas. And yep.
That's when I had a quinceañera, and like when you said like the complicated kind of rituals of quinceañeras, definitely like I remember like it was a decade ago now, and I'm like, whoa, like every single little step, and it was such a big thing in high school. I remember like everybody's having their quinceañeras at the same time, who was
Yep.
going to be in the court, who wasn't on the court, like these things feel so major and big to a teenage girl, right?
Of
And
course.
so while you were doing research for this book, did you talk to any girls that were going through quinceañeras, or did you go back with your own family and interview them? How was the research process for that like?
I did go back to my family and talk to them about it. And I sort of collected memories of quinceañeras that obviously I'd been to, and quinceañeras that my family had been to more recently. And I read some books about quinceañeras and watched a lot of videos on YouTube of people doing their dances and different things, and just sort of worked with it from there.
I know you kind of touched on it a little bit before, but what is your writing process like, and where do you write? I'm so interested in craft, like, and where
Sure.
people write their craft, and I just want to learn a little bit more.
Um, well, I am a pantser, sadly, which means that I write by the seat of my pants. I'm working on that. I'm really trying to learn how to outline and plot sequentially, but at this book, I did not write that way. I write my scenes in order. So my first draft is just me telling myself the story, and it is usually very messy and way too long, and then I cut it down from there. I have a writing group and I show them pieces of the book as it's happening, and then I incorporate their feedback so that hopefully by the time I get to the end, it's much cleaner than when
If I could ask, like, where do you write? Like,
I
go ahead.
well, I write in my living room, which is probably not the most private area to write in, but I also used to write in cafes pre-pandemic, but obviously, sadly, that is not an option at the moment. I pretty much try to find any space in my house that feels somewhat private so that I can put on my earphones and block out everybody and just concentrate. Easier said than done these days because
Yeah.
everybody's home all the time.
Right? It's like, leave me alone.
Yeah,
I ask
exactly.
because I find that so interesting, because I know when I write, it's a little bit different type of writing, but when I write, I like lay on my bed and have the computer
Oh,
like this close to my screen. So like I'm always interested in finding out like where people write. And I noticed you mentioned you had headphones, and was there any specific like
mhm.
songs or playlists that you listened to or created while writing this book?
I did create a playlist of songs that just put me in mind of the characters and what they were going through. And a song I listened to, there were two songs I listened to a lot, and one is in English and one is in Spanish. I listened to Mi Niña Bonita a lot because it was at a pivotal moment in my story. So I would play it on repeat, especially when I got to that scene, so that I could really describe how somebody would sing that song and how the background and the music and everything would change. And the English song was Do I Want to Know by the Arctic Monkeys, because my characters at the beginning are very unsure of each other and there's a lot of late night conversation, and it sort of captured that feeling of uncertainty when you're talking to somebody that you really like, but you're not sure how they feel about you.
Great choices. I love the Arctic Monkeys, and like you said, La Niña Bonita, and it like literally popped in my head right now, and I'm like, oh, it's in repeat in my mind.
Exactly.
But while you were writing the book, I know you said it went through a lot of drafts. Was there anything that surprised you as a writer as you were going through these drafts that you didn't expect to become so prominent, like a scene or a moment that you're like, whoa, this like changed completely from the very first time I like thought of it?
I think the biggest thing that changed was when I started writing the book, it was going to be a love triangle. And as I started writing, I wasn't quite satisfied with the love triangle angle. And then the character of Mauro popped into my head, and I started to create him. And he basically ended up becoming the love interest, which was not at all what I intended when I started writing the book. So that was surprising because it really changed the dynamic of the book completely.
I can
In a good way,
imagine.
I'm happier
Yeah.
with it.
So you're writing a YA book from a teenage girl's like perspective. How do you find her voice, and how do you develop that voice?
That is a really good question, because that's definitely changed over time. When I started writing the book, I felt very connected to that teenage voice, and I was able to really channel it clearly. As time has gone on, I have a daughter, and she was 10 when I started writing the book, and now she's 15. And I find that now my teenage voice is sort of merging with hers a little bit in an interesting way, just because I spend so much time with her. So, in a weird way, it's sort of like I'm accessing twin voices now, in a way that I did not when I started writing the book.
Interesting. Yeah, you got your daughter on call. I'll be like,
Yeah, seriously, her and her friends. I'm like, this is because every now and then she'll read a piece that I've written and she'll say, "Nobody says that anymore, Mom." I was like, okay, good, good to know.
I wanted to ask you about releasing your book during pandemic. I know that must be stressful and crazy, and I'm just so curious. Like, what is that process like? Like, how has that changed? Are there any pros and cons and things like that?
It's been interesting. I was really hoping that the pandemic would have ebbed a little bit more by the time the book came out. Not just because of the book, obviously, but just in general. Ready to move past this. But it is definitely changing the experience a little bit in terms of obviously being able to have physical events in bookstores, which is kind of sad just because I used to work in a bookstore and it was my dream to have my sort of release party there, my launch party there. And obviously that's not going to happen. But things that I like about it is I love how the online community has really exploded to the point where you have all access to so many events now all over the country, all over almost the world actually. And because I know that there are conferences that have taken place like in Australia and New Zealand that we wouldn't necessarily have had access to. So there's just so much more opportunity to really connect to people in all sorts of places where otherwise it would have been just, very localized where I am.
Of course, I feel like there's definitely like a more accessibility, I think, in terms
Mm-hmm.
of attending events and watching events. I'm like having conversations like these,
Right.
that it can just be done with technology. I mean, so
Mm-hmm.
that's definitely a pro. But I'm assuming you like really miss like that human to human kind of interaction with people and that kind of stuff.
To some extent, but it's nice to. I think I've gotten so used to Zoom and different things that it just sort of feels like human interaction.
You're like, it's the same thing. What are you talking about?
The same.
Going back to the book a little bit. So you're doing your main character, you're writing her. What's your favorite thing about her? And what do you enjoy writing with her the most?
My favorite thing about her is that she is very unafraid to say pretty much anything out loud. And I appreciate that because I was not like that at all as a teenage girl. I had all of these thoughts, but they sort of stayed locked in my brain. And I was very much somebody who wanted to be liked and somebody who wanted to do well and just kind of a goody two shoes growing up.
Yeah.
And so writing somebody who's kind of unafraid of sort of being a kind of a bad girl was super fun.
Yeah.
And my favorite thing to write with her is her dialogue. I love the things that she says to people and the things that people say back to her, and just sort of that give and take is definitely my favorite part. So I mean, when you read my first drafts, they almost read like screenplays because it's obvious that my favorite thing to write is dialogue. So it's just like people talking to each other, just disembodied people talking to each other. And then when I go back, I'm just like, oh, they have to be physically doing things and they have to be situated in a space that the reader can see.
Yeah.
That comes later.
And I wanted to ask you about setting. Like, what made you specifically pick the setting, Florida, for this book?
I picked Miami for a couple of different reasons. One is my parents lived there, they retired there. So I've spent a lot of time there traveling back and forth. And Miami is just a really interesting place to me in the States because it is the place that I feel most connected to being Latina, just because everything overwhelmingly is sort of Latin there. And I appreciate that because I don't feel that necessarily in other parts of the country. Definitely not where I live right now in Minneapolis. I love Minneapolis, but it's definitely not as sort of tropical and Latin as Miami is. So I wanted to have an atmosphere where it wasn't even a thought. It was just, this is the way that people are. This is the way that we live our lives. And there isn't any sort of conflict. It was a little bit of wish fulfillment because I've always felt a little bit of conflict in different places that I've lived. I've always felt like, one in a much larger crowd. So it would have been nice growing up in a place where I felt like I was surrounded by other people who were kind of like me and my family.
I wanted to close off things by asking you what's next. Do you have any other books in the making? And are there any like major themes that you want to explore next?
Yes, I am working on a second book, which has been a journey, an experience. It's still very much in flux as far as sort of characterization and everything. So there isn't a whole lot I can say about it, except that it's going to be another contemporary, probably a romance, and it's going to also be Latinx characters. But other than that, your guess is as good as mine. I'm still figuring it out. And as far as themes that I'm interested in exploring, I'm really interested in exploring sort of the idea of being seen and being accepted for who you are, and how that can make you feel really connected to another person. And another theme that I'm interested in exploring, obviously, is the idea of coming of age and how that can look different for different people. And it doesn't have to be sort of prescribed during a very specific ritual, because obviously in my book, the character who is having the quinceañera is not necessarily the character who's coming of age as far as the book goes. So I'm interested in that because, I mean, I still feel like I'm coming of age to a certain extent. I definitely am as a writer. So there is no sort of deadline or set time limit for when you start to come into your own personhood.
Yeah, that's my favorite type of story. Like a coming of age doesn't necessarily have to be boxed in this very specific tiny little time frame. Like I like it when it's like older people and like you can continue coming of age as time goes on, and that's something that really interests me as a reader. Do you plan or do you plan on staying in YA, or do you want to expand to like different kind of age ranges, like middle grade, adult, that kind of stuff?
As of right now, I'm interested in staying in YA, but eventually I could see myself writing an adult book and possibly a middle grade. I find middle grade really interesting, especially and challenging, just that age range from about 10 to 13 is so full of change and you're so much in flux that I'd be curious to just try my hand at that too.
Definitely. Yeah. And I feel like kids, they remember those books. Like I remember all the middle grade books that I read as a kid, you know, like I have them still, like they stay
Yeah.
with you. So that would be really cool. Yeah. But yeah, Monica, those are all my questions. Thank you so much for joining me today and taking a little bit of time out of your days. I really appreciated it. And I'm so excited for your book to be out in the world.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This was super fun. Thank you.
Yeah. So if people want to find you online, where can they find you?
I am still working on a website, sad but true. I will have one up someday. I am on Twitter, and you can look me up, MG Hira, or my handle is Mardu Ledger, which I probably should change to a professional name at some point, but at the moment it's Mardu Ledger. And I'm also on Instagram, Monica Gomez Hira, kind of same thing.
Yay. So everybody go follow her, go check out her book. So once again, thank you so much for joining me, Monica. I had so much fun. And yeah, see you later.
See you. Thank you so much. Bye.